At a French bread festival in May 2025, amongst a sea of golden brown European loaves, something white, plump, and pillowy suddenly appeared. Taking a closer look, you realize it's a Chinese steamed bun, a mantou, that is secretly snuck into the competition. You gotta love it. It's like seeing your childhood best friend suddenly show up backstage at the Victoria's Secret fashion show. But honestly, it's not totally out of place for a mantou to compete under the title of Chinese bread. After all, the basic process for both mantou and bread is the same. Flour, water, and a leavening agent are kneaded into a dough. It's only the final cooking method that's completely different. One gets sent to a steamer, the other gets sent to an oven. So if they both start from wheat, why did the Chinese end up steaming their bread while Europeans ended up baking it? Steamed buns, baked bread. On the surface, it just sounds like two different ways to cook wheat. But when we take the razor-sharp blade of history and peel back the layers of this culinary question, we discover that behind this simple steam versus bake divide lies a fundamental difference in the staple food structures of the East and West. Before potatoes and corn arrived from the Americas, the early European diet, shaped by climate and culture, was almost entirely dominated by one thing: wheat. And I mean all kinds of wheat. Common wheat, barley, oats, rye, all of it covering the fields as far as the eye could see. Now, all these grains have a key structural feature, a furrow down the middle. This means that even after hulling, about 15 to 25% of the tough outer bran still clings to the kernel. If you try to just boil it into a porridge, it's coarse and scratchy. For the nobility who preferred refined foods, this was a definite no-go. So they came up with a simple solution: smash it with rocks. The ancient Egyptians even added sand to the mix to increase friction when grinding the grains. Afterwards, they'd sift it to get a finer flour. Then they'd mix that flour with water to form a dough. So how do you cook it? Back then, even in the heart of European civilization around the Mediterranean, the main cooking methods were just boiling and roasting. When you tried to boil the dough, it would often fall apart because the flour wasn't fine enough for the gluten to properly hydrate. But roasting it on a hot stone, that worked. It produced a flatbread. Then around 2600 BC, a legend says some Egyptian slave was slacking off on the job and a piece of dough was accidentally left out in the open air. It started to ferment. When they baked that dough, the inside came out fluffy and soft. It was bread. After a lot of trial and error, the Egyptians mastered the technique of sourdough fermentation and even designed custom-built stone ovens specifically for baking bread. Later, the Romans, who were still drinking that scratchy
"You can do that with wheat? Give me that." The Romans took the Egyptian techniques and upgraded everything. They built large-scale water mills and brick ovens, which massively improved the efficiency and fineness of the flour and gave them better temperature control for baking. They even started adding milk, cheese, and spices to the flour, creating the first cakes and pastries. Meanwhile, as the Egyptians were kicking back and enjoying their bread, that same wheat was on a long journey east. Limited by climate, it had to cross the Caucasus and Hindu Kush mountains, travel through Turkmenistan and Pakistan, and finally arrived in the heart of ancient Chinese civilization, the Yellow River Valley. But it was late to the party. The staple food scene here was already dominated by the old guard, millet and sorghum. On top of that, wheat didn't adapt well to the local conditions at first, so its yield and acreage were low. But it had one superpower. It was a winter crop. It could be planted in the fall and harvested in the summer, right when the millet and sorghum stocks were running low and the autumn grains weren't ready yet. So, wheat found its place as a supplemental grain, though it was still seen as a bit of a B-lister in the 5 grains of China. Now, the mainstream cooking methods in China at the time were also boiling and roasting. But because millet and sorghum don't have that pesky furrow, you don't need to grind them into flour. You can just boil the whole grains, which is super convenient. So when wheat showed up, it didn't get any special treatment. There was no custom grinding system built for it.
It was just treated like the other grains and boiled into what was called wheat rice. It was still pretty coarse. Our Neolithic ancestors in China cooked using a fire pit and a special tripod pot called a li. The three-legged design kept it stable over the fire and increased the heating surface area, making cooking more efficient. So, when did the Chinese finally start eating fluffy steamed buns? Well, three things had to happen first: the invention of the steamer, the milling of wheat into flour, and the discovery of dough fermentation. The steamer actually appeared very early in Chinese history. A Neolithic composite cooking vessel called a yan was basically a boiler on the bottom and a steamer on top, separated by a perforated plate. This allowed high-temperature steam to cook the food, preserving its original shape and making it tender and flavorful. So why did China develop steaming as a core cooking technique? Ultimately, it comes down to the traditional food structure. For ancient agricultural societies, staple grains provided over 90% of a person's calories. So, the way you cook your main grain profoundly shapes your entire culinary technology tree. And because of different natural resources, the ratio of vegetables to meat in side dishes also differed between China and the West.
Chinese side dishes were primarily vegetable-based, which is perfect for boiling. Western side dishes were primarily meat-based, which is perfect for roasting. So, to sum it up, early Chinese cooking was water-based, while early Western cooking was fire-based. As Europeans leveled up their bread-making skills, they put their skill points into grinding and ovens, developing finer flour and better ovens. But in China, where the focus was on boiling grains, the skill points all went into water-based cooking, which eventually led to the evolution of a brand new technique: steaming. Fast forward to the Han Dynasty, wealthy households started having separate kitchens, and the simple fire pit evolved into a fixed enclosed stovetop. This new stovetop was much more energy efficient, so the steamer pot was redesigned to have a round bottom. And with the popularization of wooden steamer baskets, steaming quickly became a signature Chinese cooking method. At the same time, wheat finally had its glow-up. As we've mentioned, wheat rice wasn't very popular because it was coarse. But during the Qin and Han dynasties, massive irrigation projects and new farming techniques finally solved many of wheat's adaptation problems. Yields and acreage shot up. As more people started eating wheat, the stone mill became widespread. Once the hard requirement of milling was met, wheat could finally be turned into flour and dough. And at this point, our ancestors faced a crossroads. Should we bake it or steam it? But this is China. We don't do either or. We do yes and. First, being pragmatic, they chose to steam the dough. The reasons were simple. Steaming is awesome. Like baking, it doesn't break down the dough's structure, resulting in a soft, fluffy texture. But you could also steam it in the same pot with vegetables or meat, saving precious fuel. At first, they just steamed flatbreads. But eventually, after another accidental discovery of sourdough fermentation, the fluffy steamed mantou was born. Of course, the universe of Chinese noodles and breads is vast. It isn't just about steaming. Since the Han Dynasty, all flour-based foods were simply called bing. There were steamed bing, boiled bing, and baked bing. The baked version was known as hu bing, and as the name suggests, it came from the nomadic Hu people of the western regions. During the Han and Tang dynasties, cultural exchange with these regions was frequent, and their baking-centric food culture, including the famous Hu Bing flatbread, gradually made its way east. But even with steaming, boiling, and baking in their arsenal, Chinese chefs didn't stop there. As kitchen tools evolved, so did the cooking methods. The arrival of the iron wok in the Song dynasty opened up a whole new world.
At the same time, new oil pressing technology made cheap vegetable oil widely available.
With a wok and oil, a revolutionary new cooking technique was born: stir-frying. And from stir-frying came dozens of variations: flash frying, sautéing, and more. Expensive techniques like pan frying and deep frying were now accessible to the common person. This updated the entire operating system of the Chinese food universe. Steamed and boiled buns and dumplings evolved into pan-fried pot stickers. Noodles could now be stir-fried. And, of course, you had heavyweight calorie bombs like fried dough sticks and fried bread. This entire, incredibly diverse world of food, steamed mantou, fried noodles, pan-fried dumplings, boiled noodles, was born from the traditional heart of the Chinese kitchen: a stovetop and an iron wok. But all these varied cooking methods demanded more precise fire control. In the Ming and Qing dynasties before gas stoves, this was achieved with bellows. By manually pumping air into the stove, you could get the fire roaring for intense steaming, stir-frying, and deep frying. It wasn't until the late 19th century that Western gas stoves were introduced in Shanghai, starting another massive shift in the Chinese kitchen. After China's reform and opening up, gas stoves entered millions of homes, and the iconic scene of men on tricycles selling gas canisters became a unique snapshot of that era. Today, most of us use piped natural gas, and the gas canister has also faded into history. From a smoky earthen pit to the modern gas stove, it took over 100 years. In that time, the culinary cultures of China's diverse regions have collided and fused. But our demand for deliciousness, stir-frying, stewing, braising, steaming, pan-frying, deep-frying, roasting, smoking, none of it has disappeared. From simple baking and boiling to complex stir-frying and steaming, every step forward has made cooking easier and brought more joy to our tables. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you're curious about who decides what we eat in the modern age, stick around for our next video. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.